As I mentioned earlier, back in the 80s and the 90s, they took butter out of our diet, or at least said we shouldn't be eating it. Red meat, they said, caused heart disease. Eggs were bad for you because they were high in cholesterol. And really, the tune has changed that we can see that those foods are actually really healthy for you. But again, as I mentioned, it's really important what those animals are eating. So they need to be eating pasture, they need to be out in the pasture, they need to be eating grass then, they need to be eating what they were designed to eat. And the reason for that is because it really impacts the fat makeup of that animal or that egg or of the butter. And what I mean by that is there's different types of fats that we can have. We've probably all heard of monounsaturated, like olive oil, really good healthy fat for us. We maybe have heard of saturated fats because we think of like red meat has saturated fats, and coconut has saturated fats, and there can be good saturated fats and there can be bad saturated fats. But then there's also these fats called polyunsaturated fats. And polyunsaturated fats will come as omega-3s, omega-6s, and omega-9s. And we've probably all heard of how healthy omega-3s are for our body. We actually need all of those. We need the omega-3s, we need the omega-6s, we need the omega-9s, but we need them in the right ratios. And if we have them out of ratio, out of proportion, then they can be unhealthy for us. And so when we look at omega-6s to omega-3s, omega-6s are going to be found in many of your grains, okay? When you look at omega-3s, we tend to think of fish, but they can also be found in red meat and eggs and in chickens and such, venison, bison. It can be found in wild game. And so when we look at the ratio, we really don't want to be eating anything more than 4 to 1 ratio of omega-6s to omega-3s. So for every 4 grams of omega-6s, we need to have at least 1 gram of omega-3s, and ideally it almost should be like a 1-to-1 ratio, so about a 1.5 to 1 ratio of omega-6s to omega-3s. The problem is with the way of many Americans eat, eating lots of grains and such, or meat that's being fed grains, so that can impact its amount of omega-6s. Now we're seeing people that are eating 25 to 1 ratio, even as high as 50 to 1 ratio of omega-6s to omega-3s. And the problem with that is that causes inflammation in our body. And as we mentioned earlier, the inflammation is really what drives heart disease, so we really want to reduce that amount of inflammation. So 2 things you can do is, one is really reduce the amount of omega-6s by not eating a lot of grains, especially the processed grains. We want to avoid meats that where they're eating a bunch of grains because they'll have higher omega-6 content. And then we want to increase our omega-3 content, and the way we do that is to eat more fish, but then eating animals that are being raised in their natural setting, eating grass, being out in the pasture, and that will increase the omega-3s, so you can get closer to that omega-6 to omega-3 ratio of that no higher than 4 to 1, and sitting around that 1.5 to 1 ratio is ideally what you want to have. That reduces the inflammation, and then that reduces your risk of heart disease.